Hey, what's going on everyone? It's Jacob from Martin's Woodworking, and today I'm going to show you how I made these simple bedside shelves, and I'm also going to show you how I customized mine to get rid of the need for a lamp. I've never seen anyone use these touch lights before in furniture, but I'm sure it's been done. I hate having to reach for a lamp and turn on a light and all that jazz. It's just too much clutter, so this is my solution. I put these in a project about a year ago, but I figured now, since I have YouTube, this would be a good opportunity to show everybody how I did it. To get these floating bedside shelves started, we need to get some lumber cut to approximate length. I ended up using rough milled 3/4 inch walnut for this project, so I had to mill everything up, cutting the boards extra long on my miter saw, then sending them through my planer. If you buy wood from the store that is already surfaced on all four sides, then you won't have to deal with the milling process. But still cut the boards a little longer than the final dimension. My shelves finished at 15 inches wide and 12 inches deep. Once I had everything milled up, I glued the planks together. This is still slightly oversized from what my final dimensions will be. I apparently didn't record the gluing process, but it's pretty straightforward. Once the glue had dried, I chiseled off the squeeze out and began running my board through the planer to get things even and flat. You don't need a planer for this, you can just use a sander to flatten out the glue seams. It will just take a little more time. After getting everything flat, I used the table saw to get my pieces for the sides and back cut out, and I also cut the top to its final dimension of 15 inches long and 12 inches wide. Next, I took my side pieces to the bandsaw to cut them into two triangles. This shape will help hold the floating shelf to the wall better. It gives it a little more contact. This shape can be cut out on a bandsaw or with a jigsaw. To give this piece a little bit of character, I decided to continue the angle from the sides onto the front part of the shelf. I just drew out where the line would continue onto the top piece, set the table saw to 45 degrees, and made a cut along the front side of my piece. I believe the correct terminology would be called a chamfer. Now this is where you can get creative with this project if you want, or just skip this part with the lights and join back up later when we start the glue up. Here I'm just measuring out where I want my lights to be, and I'm marking them out with a pencil to make sure I can see my lines very well. Make sure you have the lights close to the bed. These will be in different locations on both pieces. I would highly recommend trying this a few times before you cut into your actual project. A test piece will come in handy with this part of the project. Make sure you leave enough space for the French cleats and the backboard, both measuring 3/4 of an inch. I took a drill and drilled holes through where the lights would go as relief cuts for the jigsaw. When you start cutting them with the jigsaw, you will want to be very careful and work slowly. You want these lights to fit as snug as possible. Using a chisel for bow ties might have been like a better idea. For an exact fit, just depends on what skills and tools you have laying around. I've used a jigsaw each time I've done this. Just make sure your lines are drawn very clear and exact. This is why a practice piece is very important. Next, we are going to use a router and a straight bit to clear out some of the wood from the bottom side to give the light a place to sit flush. The bottom side of the piece of wood is what we will be cutting into with the router. The top side will be the side that sits perfectly flush with the light. The bottom will have the extra cut out of it. This might just be easier to understand if I don't say anything and you just watch, but it's very important to sneak up on the depth as you will want the light to be flush with the top of the bedside shelf. Once again, a practice piece would be a good idea. This is the first time I have all the pieces laid out for you, so now things should make a lot more sense on how this is all going to go together. Here I'm just routing out a small recess for where the wire that will be plugged into the lights will go. I don't have any footage for the French cleats made of 3/4 inch plywood. To make them, just take a plywood around 4 to 5 inches in width and cut it in half at 45 degrees, and that will give you the French cleats for this floating shelf. Make sure the cleats are long enough to fit between the two sides of the shelves. Now it's time for the glue up. I used the French cleats as spacers while I glued the back piece on, to make sure I will have enough room to attach the cleat to the back later. I do not have a lot of clamps, so this was a multiple day glue up process, so don't be scared to attempt this project if you don't have a lot of clamps. I used the same 3 clamps for the entire gluing process. It just took a few days. The sides are definitely tricky to glue up, but I saved some of the cutoffs from the spot where the light went to help with even clamping pressure. I also used some super glue to help the pieces from sliding around so much, as the super glue has a quicker cure time. After a few days of gluing everything together, it was finally time to sand. I used my orbital sander, working my way through the grits up to 220 grit, rounding over some of the sharp edges, and I hand sanded some of the hard to reach places. I did wet the grain before my final sanding of 220 grit. That's totally optional. I used Howard's Feed and Wax to finish this product using an old clean sock to apply the finish, and I made sure to wipe off all the dust before applying the finish. We need to create a groove in the French cleat to allow the wire to fit through the French cleat to give it a clean look. So I marked the locations out and then took it to the table saw to cut it out. I also painted the French cleat the same color as the wall. This is everything we need to attach the floating shelves to the wall. I have 1¼ inch screws to attach the cleats to the shelf, and 2-inch screws to attach the cleat to the wall and studs. The drywall anchors are for the screws that won't hit the stud. We also have a level, stud finder, drill, and drill driver, and of course a tape measure. Now it's time to attach the cleat to the shelf. I fed the wire in first before attaching these because it will be darn near impossible to feed the wire in once it's attached to the shelf. I pre-drilled some holes and then attached my screws, countersinking them as I screwed it in. Attaching the cleat to the wall would definitely be made easier if you had someone to help, but I just measured out where I wanted the shelf to be in correlation with the bed and the headboard, marked out my studs. I drilled in the screw where the stud is first, then leveled out the cleat. Once I had things leveled, I drilled pilot holes where the next 2 screws would go. I removed the cleat from the wall and then changed drill bits to a bigger drill bit to put in the drywall anchors. Then I simply rescrewed everything into the wall, countersinking the screws as I drilled. I double checked for level and then repeated the same process on the other side. I installed the lights and got everything plugged in and gave it a test run. Everything worked great. So now it's time to get this bedside floating shelf hung up. If you need to hold anything in place like the wires of the light, hot glue works great. I didn't have to use any hot glue because my light fit very snug and it didn't require any more support. All in all, I'm super stoked about how these touch lights in my floating bedside shelves and in my previous floating bedside table turned out. Like I said before, I've never seen anyone else use these, but I love how they function. They just give the shelf a much cleaner look that a lamp wouldn't be able to provide. And they are just so easy to use with a simple tap or swipe. And they are plenty bright. That's why I only installed one on these shelves. And I really do like how they look in the dark. And with this, the bedroom series build is done. I'll make sure to link the products I use down below. If you are enjoying these videos, please consider subscribing as I have more projects coming out for y'all soon. And thanks again for watching, and I'll make sure to queue up a few videos for y'all.